join us as well. So welcome to this afternoon's webinar. Really excited about this topic. There are so many now different versions of remote working. And when I was doing the research for this, it struck me as a lot of our topics, they're quite meaty, and I'm not shying away from some of these meaty topics because they're the ones that interest me. They generate really good conversations, and I probably just need, in the time that we've got, to bring it down and zoom it down. And I know from the people we've got live with us, we've got so much experience and knowledge on this, so we're going to bang about with a little conversation around it. I'll do some domestics up front. We're using Zoom, obviously. I think from the look of it, the people, Gary and Judy, we've got live are familiar with it. You seem to have navigated your way in okay, and we can hear and see ourselves okay. We were just talking about a prop there that I've sent out, and this is central really to one of the themes I'm going to pick up on, which is big picture is very much a human, analog, physical, tactile. I could keep going with all those words, but it's something in the physical space which satisfies a human need. And although we are working remotely through a really good bit of software, that allows us for me to direct and guide and instruct and attract your responses, even through your verbal and your visual nodding and clues and body language. But actually the human need is still there to actually interact and make and do, which is why I start with get a piece of paper, get the prop, get something in front of you. Without, whilst I'm talking and finishing the introduction, you might put your name in the top left, put the date, just start becoming comfortable with the prop in front of you, which is the same for everybody in the room. And if you are watching this on a recording, which you may well be via the blog, please do follow along, and at any point you can catch me at Your Big Pick to kind of interact and share some feedback with me. It's really important to get that physical connection whilst we're using this great bit of software. It looks like you're familiar with it. I've got a gallery view on in the top right, and there's a chat function to the right as well if you want to indicate or anything to me or leave a question or anything, or you can just flag and wave at me and I'll bring you in. Just some related experience for me, and this is where I want to dive straight in. I think remote working is really hard. I think there are lots of variables at play. I think it's often underestimated, the amount of work you have to put in for it to work. And from reading your site, Judy, I was just overwhelmed with the amount of thought that goes into it. I look around at kind of niches and specialisms that people have, and suddenly you think, wow, that's actually a small and narrow focus, but then it grows out so much science and interest and work that goes into it. And that's what kind of knocked me over with the work that you've done. So I really want to get into some of that. We need to do a bit of work up front. We need to do the prep. We can obviously underestimate how much work that is. We need to put more effort up front to kind of keep those expectations up from the bottom level, and so that people go into it knowing what to expect. I think just because something's technically possible, it doesn't mean it's always the right thing to do. So sometimes we think the technology bit is everything, but again, that's back to my theme of having the human kind of construct there, and then weaving the approach into a kind of continuum of work. So a set of activities, the event, the session isn't just the one thing. It's the prep, the experience in session, and then what's going to be the outcome from that. And I think you were talking, Judy, about an effective kind of meeting or a good outcome from that. So I just want to start with maybe with Gary yourself. Just what do you think the biggest challenge is with remote working, just from my intro or your own experience?
Well, I've run my own company for a number of years now. I'm an executive director of a company called Everyday Juice Limited, and we used to be a subsidiary of the University of Sheffield. The reason why I say that is it's important because we used to be in the office space of the HR department in the Arts Tower in Sheffield. So I was surrounded by HR colleagues all day long, which is great. But then when we span out into a subsidiary, I had my own office and I could shut my door and sit in there, and it was great. I could get loads done. I really liked it. However, I worked on my own for the largest part, and running a business is lonely anyway. You know, and being that sense of disconnection from the organization and being by myself in this room, I felt was negatively impacting my own well-being. And I've got mixed feelings towards remote working. It can be incredibly useful. So I've got a laptop computer, I've got an iPhone that I'm using now, and I can connect and engage with people at any time on various different mediums. And I'm never more connected now than, well, we have never more connected now than we have been. So technology is incredibly powerful for that. But when you look at organizations like Mind, who say that the biggest contributor to mental ill health is isolation and loneliness, remote working isn't going to be beneficial to that. And we need to be mindful of the impact that the working on your own or in very small pockets can have. So although it's easy, it's very useful, you can get a lot done and you can work anywhere and anything. So you can be completely flexible in your approach to life and work. We do need to be mindful that it's not the holy grail of working, and we need to make sure that we properly understand the impact that remote working can have. So that's probably my experience, my 2 pence.
And what I would pick up there is putting the human experience, recognizing that it's actually a real person at the center of this with their own needs and expectations and well-being is what I pick up from you. We've talked at length about that in the past, and this is just a remote working context.
Yeah, we're social beings. You know, we've evolved for millennia to be surrounded by other people. And you know, we never really had that opportunity to get everything done and socialize with other people whilst not being in the same place or the same room. Now we can, and that's awesome. You know, the fact that we're talking now, and we're in different places. I'm not sure where you're based, Judy, but I'm in Nexus of the University of Leeds, and I'm able to engage with the two of you really easily, really simply here. But you don't get that, although I can see your faces, you don't necessarily get that human-to-human interaction through a phone screen. So we do need to, I just feel that we do need to be mindful that for all the benefits that remote working and flexible working brings, there are drawbacks to that. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind when we're setting up those processes.
No, that's excellent. Thanks, Gary, for that perspective. We'll come to you, Judy, in a second. I want to, before we end this call, and I'm going to enjoy speaking, I could just talk to you all afternoon about this. I do want to kind of demonstrate at one way I think you refer to, Judy, as the in-room structure or something that's familiar in the real world that you maybe bring into the virtual world. And I was digging for more and more on your website, but I timed out on that aspect because I think the example I want to use later on is going to be, before we finish, is a kind of example of that. And what I discussed today, and the reason I've got this is because on Monday morning I'm running and I want to focus in a way, and if you wouldn't mind, Judy, framing it on the actual running of a session. So I realized in putting the title together, remote working, as Gary's alluded to, can be the whole end-to-end experience over many years. The session I'm running on Monday is in India with 12 people from here, from a global bank. Be careful, I'm not allowed to mention it. Global bank, and I'm actually giving them physical props to use in the room whilst I'm visual, because I want to separate the instruction and guidance via tech from the physical human need to interact with something in the room. So over to you a bit, Judy. I'd love to know a bit about your background for as long as you want. Just tell us from your perspective, just maybe zooming in on some of those hooks. Maybe it's maybe an unknown quantity for me, so I'm just really pleased to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. And I'm wanting to pick up on what Gary's saying about what's the big challenging bit, not so much about remote working, because remote working is such a huge subject, but let's focus on remote and distributed meetings and what gets called synchronous interactions. So when we're on the call at the same time, And I think the biggest challenge is the interactions between people who work fully remotely. Now, like me, I'm in a garden office in the bottom of my garden, and I work on my own or with my husband, who's my business partner, and we're just on our own here. And lots of people work fully remotely and do it really well. And when companies recruit for fully remote employees, the good ones, they look and say, is this person going to be lonely on their own, or have they actually got an in-person network all around them in their community? Have they got a family? Have they got friends in the community immediately around them? So they're not going to come up against the loneliness of being remote. The big challenge, though, is that the experience being fully remote and the experience of being part of a hybrid team where some of the group are all together in one space and one or two or a small number are remote, that hybridness is hugely challenging. So if we look, for example, at the loneliness issue and the social aspect that you both touched on, the people who are co-located together believe that when you start the meeting, everything that happens in the meeting starts from let's get started and ends at have we all got our actions, we're done. But if you think about it, when you're co-located and you're having a meeting, there's a bunch of stuff that happens before that and a bunch of stuff that happens after. After, for example, you're all going on your way to the coffee machine or the kitchen, and you have the after the meeting when you decide what was really going on, and you sort out who's actually going to do the actions, not the people on the list, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And there's the bit before the meeting when you're talking about how's your weekend been and all that stuff. All the social aspects when you're co-located happen before you say, let's get started. But
So
when
Judy,
you're on a call like this...
On that Judy point, on your point there, Judy, then, do you structure an agenda where you seek to start with a proxy for that, any representation of it, just to give people who, like yourself, who are remote, that sense, that perception that you feel a part of that miniature bit of small talk? Do you try to do that, or
Absolutely.
does it come over as false?
Set it up. No, set it up, make it happen. So one organization we worked with introduced the idea that when any remote meeting was about to happen, everybody should aim to join 10 minutes before the official start time. So the official start time was 10 minutes past the hour, and you should aim to join and get connected on the hour. And that bit of time could be used for making your tea and getting yourself settled and finding your stuff.
I like that.
But also talking. If I'm doing a big meeting, I will actually make it much more deliberate than that. I'll say, welcome, as you're coming into the room, I'm going to put you into pairs and threes to introduce yourselves so you just know somebody before we get started. So the magic of Zoom, you can use breakout rooms to do that easily.
I was going to ask that, and I think I saw a link on your site about video facilitator. It was either on your site or was it? I think it was your site.
Yeah, it's on mine.
So this is the ability to, what you're doing there, and if I stick to my human need versus tech kind of need, what you're doing there is using the tech to satisfy that human need. So when I was doing my doodles in my book, I was flip-flopping, but at every point I knew which need I was serving, and that made sense to me. So I was using letting the human need dominate my reasoning as to putting together a session plan. And I happened to do that by getting some physical props in front of them. And you're doing it in this scenario by giving time, the resource of time. Maybe it's about giving resources. So I'm giving the resource of something to make and do with. You're giving the resource of time to create a conversation, which is a proxy for the bit that hasn't happened because you weren't there before. And do you bring forward, this is a funny question, but my brain works in different ways. Do you therefore bring forward the time of the start of the meeting to reflect at quarter to the hour, you're doing the stuff that you don't get the chance to do because you're not in the same space, and then at the top of the hour you start the meeting, or do you do it as a part of the start of the meeting? It's a funny question.
So
I apologize.
it depends on the kind of meeting. But what you'll find is that meetings run much more smoothly if people have done the social contact.
Yeah.
If you try and just dive in and try and get it all done,
yeah,
unless you're really familiar to each other and a very small group, it's the nature of human beings. They need to do various social pushing and shoving.
Yeah.
And if you try and exclude that from your event time, you just end up taking longer for the meeting.
And over how many kind of sessions have you evolved? Is this more of an academic, theoretical approach, or more practical, Judy, from your perspective?
Entirely practical. I mean, I've accidentally landed in the whole online facilitation, online training world because I was training a very niche subject, and we couldn't get enough people together to train it in the room, so I started training it online.
Yeah.
And so I've worked with hundreds now of different people, different organizations, both to facilitate events like the big event I had last Friday, which was 120 plus people from 21 countries over 12 hours online together, doing amazing stuff and creating community, which, you know, that's just joy.
Yeah.
And that contrasts with what I think you've got yourself in India, which is the nightmare scenario. I'm assuming you're in Leeds and they're in India.
I am, that's right.
Which is really, really, really hard to be the remote facilitator of group in the room.
I saw another connection on your site, which is why I was getting excited at 2 p.m., which is a proxy in the room. So I have a proxy in the room. So I have already prepared with him to feed back on some key points that I would be doing if I was in the room. So that's going to help me. But it is tricky, and that's why I wanted to delve into this topic, because I think it's a huge topic that probably doesn't get nutted out or worked through as deeply as it should in a lot of corporate organizations. They expect it to just happen. One of my favorite videos is that teleconference or video conference one, where it's like things you get away with on a video conference that you would never do in a room. And it shows the disjoint between the manners, the etiquette, the behavior that you would never do in a room versus, and it uses humor to do that. But I think it's a really serious point. Back to your overall view, Gary, from what you've heard there from Judy, how far would that go? If you were attending an event, have you got any experience of that kind of scene setting, or how do you think it could work for you?
Well, I don't really do that much of this, to be honest. So I don't really run that much through video calling. But I find the idea of including more personable conversation at the beginning and the end of a video call or conference really interesting. You know, because I agree that small talk pre and post, you know, is quite, you know, is friendly, you know, and you can, it's a bit warmer than just starting agenda item number 1 and then finishing on agenda item number 10 and then calling it a day. So I really like that idea, and when I have the opportunity, I'll try and incorporate that into discussions.
Yeah.
I still believe that as brilliant as conference calling is, I still don't think that it properly. I still don't think it's as beneficial as a face-to-face contact. But I do appreciate that if you've got people across the globe, you know, that you can't physically all be in a room every single time. I get that. So you know, so it is. There's pros and cons to both ways. And whilst we're whilst we're all being more and more mindful of sustainability and sustainable travel as well, of engaging in this kind of way is a really beneficial way of doing that instead of driving
Yeah.
to somewhere else or getting a plane elsewhere.
Yeah.
You know, so but I think we can balance both approaches.
Yeah. And this is what I just want to delve into then in the remainder of the call, because I like to start and finish promptly, as does Judy, because I read down her website. I've read so much on Judy's website, you see. I'm trying to put it into practice. And I did start with a bit of small talk, and I was going to tell you all about the cup of coffee I've got that my mum used to make me when I was little, and she was years ahead of her time with her lattes, but we never called it that. It was always frothy coffees. So I was going to do a bit of that, and then I got excited with that link and forgot to do it. But the point is, and this is where I know you mentioned an idea, Judy, this afternoon that you might want to talk about afterwards, but I just wanted to delve into the kind of meat of, we've talked about top and tailing a call and the importance of that social interaction. If we jump into the meat of the call, you know a lot less about big picture than maybe Gary might, because Gary's been on a few webinars and he and I have talked. And this is the belief that I've got, that if we don't answer this now, we might delve into it afterwards as a bit of a continuum, which is when you talk about an in-room prop or an in-room structure, what I read from that, and it might be a translation of it, is big picture works because it offers a very straightforward visual language. You can see these things behind me. This means team, this symbol. This means measure. This means technology, and this means challenge. So I've got symbols that allow people without a business background to articulate themselves and get their story across because of the way their brain makes connections. And in my experience, what I do is I provide that to them physically in the room, which when we're talking about things over the tech in terms of instruction and guidance, I actually push it to the extreme and have another camera focused on my notes that I'm making, because that's the content element of what I'm doing. So almost at every point, my brain is in two gears. It's either offering instruction and guidance via tech, in which case I'm faced this way. And then when I'm working on my notes, I don't have my other camera, so excuse me, but if I'm working on my notes, I would be down here. And then everybody else tends to go down there to work on it. And then the type of thing that we would produce is something like this. So if I'd have said to them, we have a problem in operations, we have a challenge in operations that is going to affect the customer, which is that yellow line, and how are we going to measure that? What I find useful is that because everybody's got that same visual prop in front of them, then they're then able to do the basic human need of making and doing and making sense and making connections. But then also, when they relate to each other via the tech, they're referring to the same visual language. And there's that beautiful, I think it's Hebb's law, which is a psychology piece, which is the neurons that fire together wire together. And I absolutely love that, because what it's doing is allowing everybody in remote locations to do something that is their own personal connection, but then also realize that speaking to Gary in Nexus and you, Judy, on the conference, is actually we're referring to the same isolated key elements of the business in the same way. And what I would love to continue the conversation on as an idea is, does that splitting of the instruction stroke guidance, if that's the right word, from the human need to make sense of complex information using, in this case, symbols that are provided with big picture, but there could be any, is that actually a useful and natural thing for others to feel, or is it just the way I'm facilitating it? And is there other material and psychology and references and other experiences and other champions of that way of working? Because that's really what I'm interested in. So I don't know if either have got a view to kind of help me develop that thought further, more than just in my world, because that's what I'd like to help my practitioners to do by remotely facilitating very effective sessions. So Judy, well, I'll come to you first, just as an idea, what's your kind of critique of that?
Well, there are bunches of things that are I'm going, oh, that's a bit like, so things
I love
like
that.
Jürgen Apollo's Management 3.0 kit, which has got lots and lots of very colourful props and certainly generates a shared language for a more complex set of stuff, but interesting as it is. And Lego Serious Play is obviously about people getting their hands on Lego in order to make stuff. And people are experimenting with Lego Serious Play with things like
I love the fact Judy can go in a cupboard
sending out
and check something out.
sending out bags of Lego to the remote people to make things with.
I love that. That is almost exact. I say almost. How can it almost be exactly the same? That is a great connection just behind you. That why is that? Why does someone else think that's good and I think this is like the same thing? The firing together, getting somebody doing something. That's where they make the connection and memorize. So those are two great references.
And of course, there are a bunch of people out there trying to figure out how to make shared whiteboard is the technical term for it, but shared writing and drawing and creating spaces that work remotely.
Brilliant. And on that point, Judy, and I almost feel like I might have prompted you to say that, wouldn't it be exciting if a big picture app was coming in 2020 where you can move symbols around to do it? But I feel like I'm being that awful salesy type now, saying, wouldn't that be amazing? Because that's my
As long as you're not building it from scratch, because there are so many people building similar things.
Yeah.
Let's not spend the money on building the apps. Let's get the knowledge shared.
Put the layer on top. And for me, it's just another environment in which you can make connections. So if you're in the room, you might use a certain size piece of paper. If you're at the front of the room, you might use a big board. This is a digital version, but a big board where you can pick up symbols and move them around. If you're remote, we could jump into a remote board. So we love all that. So there's three really good references. Now we'll follow up, Judy, and catch you for some like links to these things if I can't find them. I'm aware of time, and I knew we would time out and about past. Gary, from your perspective, in the kind of sense of specifically to indulge me, the splitting of the instruction and guidance from the actual making and doing, but actually I know you had a more wholesome, organic view of it, which I respect, and I feel we haven't probably dwelled on enough. So whatever you want, just in summary, just what are your thoughts?
I think we covered it all, really. So just to relay the point I've said already. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity in remote working, and there's a lot of opportunity on a business sense. So you're not, because you're able to work remotely and utilize tools like Zoom and Big Picture remotely and then anything else, it means that you're not necessarily fighting for talent as a company locally. You're able to pick out talented people for potential employees all over the place. So there's a lot of opportunity there on a business point of view. But just to reiterate what I've said, there are pros and cons to remote working in my mind, and I do believe that people should come together on a semi-regular basis for that very human need of face-to-face interaction. But Judy quite rightly said earlier on that people, it doesn't necessarily matter who that person's connected to, whether that's somebody within the organization or whether that's somebody in their local community, or both. And as long as they're able to connect with people, then that need might be fulfilled. Just to throw a bit of an example in. So we work with a very large postal company. They're based all every nook and cranny of the UK, around 150,000 staff, thereabouts, and they have depots which have got 200 or 300 people in per site. So when they've done their large annual surveys, connection to the employer is very strong in those depots. when you look at the people that work remotely, so they're postmen or the van drivers who are based throughout the UK in the middle of nowhere, they got 1, 2, maybe 3 people that they'll talk to at best on a regular basis within the employer. It's very, very strong, the data that they get back through their survey, that their engagement to the organisation is very, very weak. Because although they're part of this big, massive company, realistically, in real terms, they're more like sole traders or SMEs, because they don't feel connected to a massive organisation. And remote working, no amount of emails or chat apps, Slack or whatever, they just don't replace that face-to-face engagement with others within the organisation with a common interest or a common goal. So there's as a very circular point, but there's pros and cons to remote working. Lots of pros, lots of cons.
Yeah, and I think the 2 words which, without, I don't know if you knew it or not, you kind of reflected back the human need. The term human need, I think, is a term that is kind of captures it. There's the need for the human need first, and then the tech allows and supports and enables, just like business change needs tech, human need first, and then that's where we get passionate, that's where we're interested in, that's where we think there's a dearth of thinking and development, and it's a bit that's forgotten, and when tech comes in, it kind of overwhelms everything. So maybe people like us thinking about human first and human need, people first, all of that, have got that chance to kind of develop some of this thinking and offer things in a different ways. I'll have to wrap up there because I'm aware of time. There are 2 things on my list that probably are worth certainly picking up. The clean language point, Judy, and the diversity point as well. The next webinar is actually about diversity, very much from a different point of perspective rather than diversity in terms of race and age. So I like to take words and sometimes not accept what they've been associated with, but diversity in its true sense of everybody's got a different view type of diversity. So that one's coming up, and I know you've done a bit on that. And the clean language thing, which I know your headline with, is interesting because I might be making a tenuous connection, but I do this. Clean language, when I read your examples, were written in a narrative text form, but actually clean language could maybe be maybe this is what I'm doing by saying that symbol is team, like that's clean, that's a clean association, and maybe that's another area where we could have some fun, because I think there's something in that, the clean language. I know you say powered by clean language. I'm really interested in that, but I knew we would time out. I don't know if you want to do a minute on that and then we'll close.
We're well too tight for time to really explain the ins and the outs of what clean language is. But actually what you've just shown, your symbols, is almost it is clean in the sense that they are yours. So those are your symbols for team, for example. Clean language is about, well, for me, that's not my symbol for team. My symbol for team would be different to that. And to open up the symbolic space, which enables everybody to say, well, yes, I'm willing in this game to use that as the symbol for team. But if you actually want to know about me, then ask me about my symbol for team.
Lovely. I love that. That's like flipping it. So you give something, I talk about a reasonable and accessible framework, which is then adapted and developed by the person. I think there's a guy who teaches foreign languages called Mitchell Thomas. He talks about getting things over the net. And once you've got them over the net as a reasonable thing, it's like learning a foreign language. You're looking for someone to hit them back. So what we're looking for is to just get a meaning over the net, so the person on the other side can go, I get that general thing, but let me tell you, in the space you've given me, in the environment you've made me feel safe, let me explain what it means to me by writing. The way I would do with it is write the notes underneath. So all the narrative text underneath is then theirs. So there's a whole topic there, which is, there's a list of topics, but that's one that we could maybe have a play around with. But we better sign off there, else I'll end up with too long a recording. And I would just thank you so much for your time. Gary, you're awesome. You show up and you give your view and you're brilliant. Judy, late
Pleasure.
to the party.
Lovely to meet you.
It's proven
Likewise.
to me that I can call out and make these connections by putting the slot in the diary, finding someone who knows their subject thoroughly, and then having this sharing of view. So all our learning just goes up a couple of notches and we move on into the next space, onwards and upwards. So I'll end it there and thank you both very much, and we'll catch up soon. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care.